Hello, everybody. I'm delighted you're able to join in to today's seminar because at the moment we're so conscious of the high levels of planning and organisation that you're all involved in at the moment. The complexities, the fears, and the challenges of being in school, focused on learning and teaching as we head through this second wave into winter with a return to remote learning. In the first seminar, we took a look at some of the current work from Dr. Simon Breakspeare in Australia, aligned to the thinking around leading remotely. Today, we're going to take a look at the work of Peter de Witt in the USA around aspects of instructional leadership, or as we would say in Scotland, leadership of learning and teaching, and how effective thinking around pedagogical leadership can help us to build on from pandemic learning to true virtual learning that will be a feature in any new blended learning models. The reading provided on the site links to two pieces, one by Thomas Guskey, which will hopefully provide some food for thought, and the work we'll be thinking about today from Peter de Witt. These links are available on the Systems section on the Education Scotland Learn offer with this recording. You'll find the PowerPoint available too. This work was undertaken before the summer by Peter de Witt through some fairly big surveys of both teachers and students, and has given us some valuable insight into the thinking that was around at the time. While we may now, fingers crossed, be able to think about a return to a more normal way of living post-vaccine rollout, the remote learning of this year has opened up significant possibilities and how we may move forward in terms of reducing alienation. Michael Fullan talks about this alienation with increasing numbers of young people, a greater use of shared resources to increase accessibility and choice for young people, and a more effective way of designing the traditional school day to be more flexible. Today, I'd like to think about a few questions we might consider from the work of Peter de Witt. This framework of questions connects to our previous seminar from Simon Breakspeare, and thinking forwards helps us to set the context for your discussions today. And so Peter has asked, can we really practice instructional leadership during pandemic learning? Are we able to prioritize effective learning and teaching approaches while working remotely? And this is what we know from the research that came through from Peter's work, that most teachers and students actually really want a person-to-person in-class experience. At the start of the pandemic and lockdown first time round, we were providing mainly review work to young people, things that they could get through with, but actually we saw children and young people gradually tailing off in their engagement. Young people and children want to see the faces of their teachers and their friends. They were getting tired of worksheets being uploaded. Some people don't like being on Zoom meetings because it makes them feel uncomfortable to participate online in discussions. And as adults, that's something we too have had to get used to. Teachers have been working really hard with tools that they've been learning to use at the same time. And that's probably better this time round because they have much more familiarity and much more effective ways to engage students. Many principals are creating master schedules simultaneously because they're not sure what ongoing learning is going to look like. And I think that would be reflected here too. Many principals in the United States were still going into the school building every day, and so to them it felt unnatural without teachers and students. And 75% of over the 500 respondents in 9 different countries said that they were becoming more and more confident with the remote learning every day. So we know that across the world, schools have been returning in different ways and in different stages. But in essence, we're all experiencing the same stages. For all of us, no matter where we are in the world, this time, and again in a second lockdown, takes us through a huge range of feeling. We talk about the 5 stages of grief being denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and coming to acceptance. But actually, it's important to recognize that on a human level, we can all be in different places around these feelings. And also important to recognize what we need to do for our own health and well-being and that of our colleagues. And so while we can come to accept some of the feelings of frustration and challenges, for our system, for our children and young people and families, the most important aspect of this experience has to be what we learn from it, how we understand the new horizons that have opened up, and question what can be the new ways of learning and teaching. What are our new ways of working together? And importantly, how are we finding new ways to structure our organisations? Peter de Witt talks about having an instructional leadership framework. What does that framework of effective learning and teaching look like? So here you can see the 6 areas he focuses on, and his definition of instructional leadership, which comes very close to our description of effective learning and teaching. Instructional leadership is when those in a leadership position focus their efforts on the implementation of practices that will positively impact student learning. And so these are the 6 areas he highlights: implementation, learning, that strong focus on learning, student engagement, instructional strategies, collective efficacy, how we together can have a much greater sense of what we are doing and what we can achieve and the outcomes we can meet if we all believe that we have the power together to do it. And evaluating our impact. For me, I think the important point to make here is that in a way, it's not really about the leaders at all. It's more about how the leader develops, supports, encourages, and enables their teachers, children, young people, and parents to put the focus on the learning through all of these areas. And shortly, we're going to look at a little video clip of Peter talking about it, and I think you will find that interesting. Also interesting to note at this point with the instructional leadership framework, for some time there's been a bit of a debate in educational leadership terms between transformational leadership and instructional leadership. But looking at the work of Vivian Robinson, she says the effect size of transformational leadership is 0.11, while in her earlier work, instructional leadership was sitting at 0.42. So John Hattie acknowledges that anything over 0.4 can provide at least a year's growth in a year's time. And we see from the later work of Hattie the importance of collective efficacy and working together collaboratively as professionals to have that impact on children and young people's learnings. So now we're going to listen to Peter talk about this work. And this video will last just about 8 minutes. As you listen, please make a few notes which will help you increase your own understanding of the concepts discussed and foster conversation to deeper understanding when you're working in your smaller groups collaboratively. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you found that interesting. I'm not going to discuss any of the main points that Peter made in the video because I want you to have the opportunity to think about it yourselves first and then have your own discussion around the points he raised. I'm just going to highlight to you the next few slides that are in this PowerPoint. They are on the presentation so that you can easily go back and see them as Peter goes past the thinking around them quite quickly, and there's some interesting information that you might find useful. So this is a slide of the logic model that Peter talks about. And a program logic model is really just a big overview plan of what you're trying to do. And in terms of pedagogical approaches, it could be quite useful in looking at what online learning means in terms of meeting the needs of children and young people. So first of all, looking at the needs, what is our current reality? Where do we want to improve? And crucially, what does our evidence show us? Because in that way, you can then look at fitting the right approaches to the feedback and the evidence you're getting from young people. It then moves on to what the inputs might be and looks at the resources that you'll need to put in place to meet the aspirations of the children and young people and their engagement. And then on to activities. What activities will help you meet the goals and outputs? How will you begin to take actionable steps? How do you turn that knowledge and information from the data into action? And then, of course, the impact. What impact is that going to have on the learning and engagement of our young people? And so this is an example that Peter gave of what moving to virtual learning might look like in an online mode. So knowing that it's going to evolve, we want schools to have a deeper impact in the learning students are presently experiencing online. What do we know? What are our needs? We need to improve the situation on an ongoing basis for our children and young people. What are the inputs that we have? We know from Facebook pandemic pages, that's where Peter took his data. We know from research-based articles, we know from experts on YouTube, and we know from models of successful practice. What are the activities that we're going to put in place? And here you can see different ways in which we can put some actionable activities in. And what are the outputs? What are we actually going to do? And then, of course, eventually, what is the impact? Now, as you can see from this is a big overview plan. It's not a detailed lesson by lesson plan, but you might have some of that detail sitting behind your logic model that you and your teachers rely on to look at the finer details of planning. This is an overview, but it gives you a good sense of that bigger picture in terms of planning for virtual learning. So after that, we're going to take a look at a learning protocol to allow you to discuss this within a framework. And the protocol that we are using is Say Something. And this was devised by Short, Burke and Hayhurst in 1995. It's a really useful protocol, and we've used it in many of our programs when we're asking groups of people to look at short papers or articles, or look at a video and have the opportunity to discuss it collaboratively. And normally, if you were doing it around a paper, you would ask people to read halfway through, then stop for a discussion of the first half, and then complete the document. Or if it's longer, a bigger policy piece that you were doing with a group of staff, you might take it down in smaller chunks. And so we ask people to summarize their thinking about the piece by identifying the key points, connecting into their own work to make the theory and the practice linked closely, share some thinking about a new idea you found in the piece, and then raise a question about a concept or strategy, something you're wondering about, something you're still not sure about. It's a fairly straightforward protocol, and it allows you to have the opportunity to have the discussion around some of this thinking. You may want to record your thoughts as a group to allow you to compare with others. Thank you so much for taking the time to look at this short session. I hope you found it useful, and certainly the materials that we've referred to, the PowerPoint, the Thomas Gusky article, and the Peter de Witt article are all on the Scotland Learn page on the Education Scotland website. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.